Feel free to keep your cameras on. We will ask you to stay muted if possible, just to avoid any background noise. But welcome. All right. Okay. All right. Well, we've got a little group here, but it is 1:02, and I want to be mindful of everyone's time, so we will allow people to join in as they are available. Hey, Brian. And I mean, you know, we're all very familiar with the Zoom world these days, but we are really pleased to have some guest speakers here today to share their insights about fundraising as promised. And so we are just going to encourage everyone to keep their mics off. We have prepared some questions for our guest speakers, and I'll introduce them in a second. But just to reorient you guys, so this is our second leadership forum in the arts and culture sector in Summit County. We're going to continue to have these virtually for a little while, and really they're meant to be resource industry specific roundtables for all of you. And the last time we all spoke, you requested to hear a little bit about some new innovative fundraising strategies for year end, specifically in arts and culture. And so we're really thrilled to have both Katie Wright and Scott Meechin with us today to talk a little bit about that. So before we get started, I know many of us know our very own Katie Wright here, who is the executive director of the Park City Community Foundation. She's been with the Community Foundation for 13 years and has a lot of experience not only supporting and working with nonprofits, but also with the Peace Corps, developing a women's weaving cooperative. There's a lot of different experience that she's had in the nonprofit sector, and we're happy to have her to talk a little bit about some fundraising trends and what's happening in the sector locally in regards to philanthropy. And then Scott Meechin is the president and managing partner of the Fundraising Counsel, Inc., and that is based in Salt Lake City. He has come recommended by someone at the state level in our state arts agency. And so we were thrilled he was able to join us today. Tons of experience, over 35 years of experience in institutional advancement, including fundraising, foundation and campaign management, consulting, PR, marketing, volunteer staff management, and then has, kind of a huge list of organizations that he has worked with locally and nationally to support that work. So we're really, really grateful for both of their time to talk to us today a little bit about some new fundraising strategies at year end. I also want to acknowledge that it is Giving Tuesday, so I think this topic is really timely, and I have seen that some organizations did put out some newsletters today. I think I saw one from the Egyptian kind of capitalizing on today, but also acknowledging the fact that there's some new CARES incentives for tax deductions for charitable giving, which I thought was a really good headline to see come through, utilizing memberships as gifts. So I'm seeing some nice initiatives come through locally to support some of our local organizations. But anyways, I think this is a nice little timely topic that we can discuss as it is Giving Tuesday. So before we jump in, Tim, so I do have Tim Fellow here joining me as well. He is our treasurer for the Arts Council of Park City and Summit County on our board of directors. Tim, do you have anything to add before we get started?
No, nothing to add, but I did want to mention, I guess, that we are recording this. So for those who can't make it, we'll distribute the recording out, because I think we'll get some great information and tips and insight. And of course, for all of you attending, to go back and review that recording, I think will be helpful for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, I did get a couple of regrets, so we'll make sure to send out this video to the group to make sure that we have this archived, and then we'll also follow up with an email. We're going to be talking a little bit about some resources, and I'll make sure to follow up with an email so you guys have those in your inbox. So anyways, I think what we can do is just get started. We want to be really efficient with everybody's time here. And so the topic that we're going to be discussing today is arts and culture fundraising strategies, specifically end of year strategies, as we are December 1st today, but specifically also through the lens of COVID-19, because obviously the pandemic has shifted conversations with donors. Some donors are giving in different sectors more than arts and culture. Is there key messaging that we could be shifting as we talk about the value and how arts and culture really is critical for the social fabric of our community, for the vibrancy of our community, the mental health well-being of our community, and so we're really excited to hear what Katie and Scott have to say in that arena. So first, and I'm going to let either Katie or Scott kind of lead this off, but I figured we might as well start pretty broad in this conversation and talk about the field of fundraising in general. Since the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and I know, I mean, Katie, you guys, the Community Foundation has done a fantastic job, coming up with your community response fund. I'm curious if you guys have some key strategies that have kind of bubbled to the surface that have been really successful during this pandemic. But specifically, how might some of those new strategies that you have seen come forward, shift in strategies since COVID, how those might relate to arts and culture nonprofits and how they might not, right? Because I think as an industry, it's very unique the way that we're talking about fundraising this year. So I'm curious what's happening in the field and that's different this year.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say, I think first, I just want to acknowledge my perspective as a funder in terms of, the Community Foundation being a grant maker to your nonprofits and others, and then also someone who fundraises. So I'm happy to, answer and questions on both those perspectives today in this panel. But big picture, I think that the news of fundraising nationwide is that people have continued to give. I think the obvious challenging question for organizations like yours are where they're giving. But, and I think Cheryl Fox put it to me really eloquently, as she often does, that when the 2007 market crash occurred, people really held back. They saw their appreciated stock decline, their corpuses decline, and that has not been the story of the pandemic. So people still have funds and people are deploying them. And I think you all know that we had our community response fund, we opened it up and we received a lot of essentially unsolicited donations. I mean, people were looking for the ability to help, and we were able to be a resource for gathering funds and granting them out. In our follow-up with introducing ourselves to some people or acquainting ourselves better with other people, what I heard over and over again, unsolicited, was that this was a moment in time of urgent giving and that this was not their year giving. People who usually give to us said, oh, we'll talk again in November. Like that this gift was unique in its timing. And so that gives me hope that the year end can finish strong and finish strong for nonprofits like yours that have good donor relationships, that maybe those donors did give elsewhere earlier, but they still are feeling very fortunate wealth-wise and also very attached, to this community that frankly has been a pretty great place to be in a pretty terrible time. So big picture, I would say, addressing the question of like what's happening in the field of fundraising, I would say, I think the story is people have continued to give through the pandemic. And I think that year end, people are still very, very positioned, especially in a community like ours, to continue to give financially.
Well, and I would agree with what Katie said. I always love the question about what is new, what's the new way to raise funds? And the answer has always been, it's the same as the old way. There are no new ways to raise money, but there are three key words that I think every organization needs to pay attention to. And the first word is to communicate. There is no way you can over communicate with your donors and your constituents right now. They will not get tired of emails, letters, phone calls. I mean, granted, not 4 times a week, but letting them know how you're doing and what you're doing. The second word would be relationships. You need to be protecting, maintaining, and growing your relationships. 80% of fundraising, I know lots of organizations focus on writing the proposals and doing all that. 80% of it is relationships. Do they feel like the only time they hear from you is when you need money, or are you building those relationships year round? And then the last word is ask. The number one reason that people don't give is that you didn't ask them. And so one of the things that I think a lot of organizations, especially arts organizations, need to be careful of is just because you're an arts and cultural organization, it doesn't mean that people aren't going to support you.
Mm-hmm.
They realize that we're going to come out of this pandemic at some point, and they're still going to want you to be there. So don't make up their mind for them by not asking them to consider supporting your organization because you're afraid you're not worthy. Some donors and foundations have been more open to, especially on the foundation side, to providing general operating support this year as their gift rather than making it project-specific proposals. But you don't need to raise money in a new way. You just need to go back to the fundamentals of the old way of communicate, focus on the relationships, and make sure you ask. There are too many organizations that are shy about asking because they don't think they're the cure for cancer. Well, if you don't ask, somebody else is out there asking. And later on, as we talk, I'll share some stories about what some of our clients are doing. But to Katie's point, people are still giving. They have not stopped giving, and they're going to want you to be there. But you need to be honest and open about where you are in the current situation so that they know how to help.
I agree with everything Scott said. And the one thing I'd add that's not new, but sort of is new that I have found helpful that I think is unique to our Park City context is there are part-time residents that I've been trying to have coffee with for like 4 to 5 years. But why would you want to go on vacation and have coffee with me? I mean, you're here to like spend time with your family, go see a great show. So of course they always say no. And those people are actually quite willing to get on a Zoom call for 15 minutes when I just say, hey, thank you for your past gift. I want to tell you what we're doing and hear your thoughts on Park City right now. And people I have not had the opportunity to connect with are like sitting in their boring home offices and like, sure, I'll talk to you for 15 minutes. So for me, that has been like this just kind of great opening that honestly, had I asked before for a video meeting, I'm sure those people would have said no then too, but the world is different. And that's something that in terms of those part-time residents that we probably all have like as ticket buyers and, all that sort of thing, they might be willing to actually make a connection that you haven't been able to make before. So that's been kind of exciting.
Yeah, I think that's true. We've had clients, we're actually doing some focus groups for a client for a capital campaign, and we wanted to do it in person. That was going to we were going to start them in the spring, when the pandemic hit. We ended up doing them over Zoom over the summer. They were incredible. So people are open to this. Plus, they are starving for contact with somebody.
True. Well, and I think, it's interesting because it is a little bit of a silver lining is this new adoption of new technologies that does kind of widen our reach and allow us to connect much more broadly with people that maybe aren't consistently in our community. So I suppose that is a silver lining and interesting to hear that that's worked for you guys in a couple of different arenas. So I wanted to bring up, because I know that something that we've been talking about is really how to discuss the new CARES Act incentives for 2020 charitable giving. We know that the AGI limit has been removed so that donors can claim up to 100% of their charitable giving, and I may be getting this wrong, and Tim knows much more about this than I do because it's more within his field. And then anyone can deduct up to $300 without itemizing for charitable purposes. So I'm just curious of Katie and Scott, your thoughts on how these incentives impacts philanthropic giving, and what are your thoughts on how arts and culture organizations can really leverage this from a messaging standpoint? How do we communicate that and have conversations with donors in particular about these incentives to really maybe boost some year-end gifts?
I may surprise you a little bit here, but I'd be careful about making the focus of any ask about the CARES Act. Decade after decade, there have been surveys about reasons donor gives, and the last reason in every survey is tax benefits. It's always at the bottom of the list. If you make it about that, you're not making it about your mission and the lives. People give money to change lives. They don't give money to get a tax benefit. If they get it, they get it. The additional $300 will be nice. It's not going to make a huge difference to the folks that are giving to you. Now, the one place where especially the changing AGI may make a difference is if you're having conversation. Where it makes a difference is not the size of a gift, but perhaps the timing of the gift or the structure of the gift. Where it may make a difference would be somebody like the foundation who maybe has had long-standing or long-running conversations with major donors about making a significant gift, or an initial donor to make a large gift, or somebody's into a capital campaign, and you may have a donor that has an AGI issue. That may affect them, but those kind of folks are going to have good tax counsel. We don't need to be in the tax counsel business. I would not make your case, give us money because you get to deduct $300 more. I would make your case, look at how we're changing lives. They'll hear about that. I would not do a whole lot of messaging around that whatsoever, because you'll miss the point of the difference you're making.
I was kind of hoping this is where like Scott and I would have a really different point of view, but I'm in total agreement. I just think it's boring, and you guys are not boring. Like arts and culture is the opposite of that. You are soul fulfilling. And so it's a little bit like a wet blanket on something that's feel good. And also our community here has really great advisors, like the best advisors. So we're never going to bring something in front of someone that they're not getting from their financial advisors, tax advisors, things like that. I mean, I would say in general, we're probably a well-advised community. Maybe the place you would just have like a quick little reminder at the end of your newsletter after the fun stuff, or social media, you could like repost if we usually do like 5 tips for end of year giving or something like that, just for content and interest, because it might nudge someone to think, oh, maybe I could give a little bit more. But I agree with Scott. I don't think it drives giving. I think people are getting better advice than we can give them. And I guess the one that I think is actually the most interesting to people that for me seems totally underutilized is highly appreciated stock. It's just amazing to me how little people give of it, and that makes a ton of sense. But even then, it would just be like a tiny little thing at the end of your newsletter. I think lead with your impact. Tim, though, do you feel differently?
No, not necessarily. And I guess in my previous life that, I was having those conversations with donors on the strategy side of, trying to reduce taxes. But I did have a question for you, Katie, on maybe just quickly what the Community Foundation's plans are this year, if they differ from previous years on advocacy broadly for the nonprofit sector on year-end giving. Is there kind of a campaign ready to go, or any letters to the editor, and you with your recent retirement announcements, it almost is like an opportunity to kind of do one big ask for the nonprofit community in this year in particular. I'm not sure if what the plans are.
Well, I don't have such great financial place that I'm retiring, but yes. Do we have a final year end? Yeah. It's a great suggestion and not something that we've spent a lot of time on so far. We have been pretty knee deep in grant making right now with the community relief funds that we're working on, and just rolled out our climate funds. So we're just sort of pivoting to that end of year focus ourselves. We have been very vocal about unrestricted giving early, and giving ahead. And that won't end. And we actually do that all the time. But I think the pandemic gave us an excuse to kind of really hammer people with smart philanthropy. And hopefully some of those habits will stick. And we did find people respond to it. We in our own donations, we were talking about it in terms of like, when you're supporting nonprofits, if you always give to them in December, give to them now, give to them again, unrestrict your gifts, those sort of things. And we found people were doing that in their giving to us. So we do feel that the message was heard, and certainly we'll continue on with that. I think the one thing we're really looking at that I mentioned to Jocelyn and Tim before this opened up is we are going to do a nonprofit stabilization survey. We did something kind of in the very beginning and then midsummer, and we really want feedback to know where different organizations are. We know in particular arts and culture have been hit hard, and also like children's programming has been hit pretty hard. So those are two areas where we see, a lot of need, and we could position us to have a good plan going into Q1. But Tim, it's a good suggestion. I'll bring it to the team.
Thanks. Well, I mean, I think that's great advice. I mean, I think we see these opportunities through the CARES Act, and we wonder if we should capitalize on them. And I think the more you talk about it, I also am in agreement that, it's not a great story, right? Like our impactful stories are the gifts that we share as organizations, the impact that we make. And so, and it's all mission driven. So that's helpful. I appreciate your guys' thoughts on that. So, I mean, to kind of dovetail off of that, here we're talking about storytelling, which is probably the most important way that we can communicate the way, when Scott was talking about the key elements to successful fundraising, communication, relationships, and asking, you do that a lot through storytelling, and then you cultivate those relationships. So I'm curious if you guys have any, and maybe, I mean, Katie, you've seen a ton of activity locally, and so but maybe of some other organizations that are doing a really good job of telling that why story, but in this framework of COVID, to support arts and culture, why it's important. And then Scott, I mean, I don't know if you know anyone in Salt Lake or maybe Utah-wide or nationally, if you have some case studies of organizations that have done a really good job in, I mean, I think we're all tired of this word, but pivoting messaging that makes it relevant to COVID, but really, I mean, it creates not a negative sense of urgency, but shifts messaging to support the critical and dire need for immediate fundraising, like you were talking about, Katie, like early, and do it now, and support us, and buy a membership package even though we don't have programming to give right now. So I'm just curious if you guys have any good examples of some organizations that have really that why story down, and that we could maybe take as I don't know, maybe a template, and a helpful resource.
All right, I'm off mute. So, there you go. Go ahead, Scott.
You want to go first, or you want me to?
You go.
Okay. Well, let me share some stories about what some other organizations are doing. I'm not going to quite address pivoting messaging, but how they're staying in touch. I mean, I think one of the most important things you need to do with any of your donors or prospective donors is just be honest with them. Don't be whiny about how COVID is affecting your organization. Just be honest about, here's what we've done and here's how we've adjusted. Because the arts are so important, they were important before COVID and they're going to be important after COVID. So the story's the same. What has changed is the importance of regular communication and relationship building. So let me give you some examples from some organizations we work with, and some of them you'll be familiar with. So Ballet West is a client of ours. And as we're working with them as they get ready to go into a campaign as they approach their 60th anniversary. Some of you may know Sarah West. So I spent a lot of time working with Sarah. And a couple of things that they've done, especially during the summer, staying in touch. So they had a couple dancers that bake pies. Has nothing to do with dancing. So these dancers baked some pies and they delivered them on July 3rd for July 4th for family gatherings. They didn't stop and visit. They didn't do any of that. They identified, here's basically our major prospect pool, individuals, foundations, corporations, and they delivered these pies. Well, the dancers in August weren't working, so they gave them scripts, and they had the dancers call major donors and longtime season ticket holders just to say thank you. Here's what's going on. Here's what we're doing. If any of you follow Ballet West on social media, there's some of them that kept practicing at home. And so they would do these little videos and put them up on social media of here I'm practicing for whatever the performance is. So what they were doing is staying in touch and saying thank you. The executive director and the development director also have a small group, probably 15, maybe to 20 of their most important supporters or decision makers. And they have been calling them every 4 to 6 to 8 weeks and giving them a very direct update. Here's where we are financially. Here's what's going on with the season. This is before Salt Lake County closed down all the facilities again and kind of put a hold on Nutcracker. But really answering their questions about here's where we stand financially. Here's some of the funding we've gotten. Here's what we're doing with our staff. It has just been a very, very direct conversation just to keep them posted. Well, all of you can do that with your the organizations that are the most important to them. It doesn't have to be flowery and it doesn't have to be sugar-coated. It just has to be very direct and honest and let them know when you're going. Let them know how you're doing, what the issues are. They will ask what they can do to help, and you need to be prepared. And so some of them have gotten some either bridge funding or significant year-end funding that is general operating support. Some of you may be familiar with Utah Youth Orchestras and Ensembles. Barb Scowcroft from the Symphony runs it, and it's a high-end orchestra of high school kids from across the state. Well, they love to perform. Well, they weren't able to do any of their performances. They do large performances. So what they did is we worked with them and identified probably about 10 major supporters and prospects. One of them was up in Park City, and they offered to do private concerts in their yard this summer. So they would bring 2 or 3 kids, that the kids were socially distant. They would invite some of their neighbors over. One gentleman in Salt Lake lived in a cul-de-sac. He invited all of his neighbors out. They had popsicles. They all had lawn chairs, and these kids performed. There was no asking for donations, even though almost everyone who came then wrote a check. And so there again, the kids get to perform. Barb gets to talk a little bit about what the orchestra or what the ensemble does, and these folks get to have a free concert in the yard. There may be only 10 or 15 people there, but it's a way of getting them out there. We've got an environmental organization down in Monticello called the Canyon Country Discovery Center. Almost their entire season, they run river trips and outdoor trips and do environmental education. Places like Bears Ears and down on some of the rivers, and all that just came to a complete standstill. They were able to get some donors, again, since they're communicating regularly with them, who made some significant gifts. But one of the things they're doing, in fact, when I get at this call, their executive director's in town today. They've got a list of major donors here, that support them, as well as some state agencies. And they had some branded backpacks and water bottles that a company gave to them. And the backpacks all have hold water and they have not flasks in them. What am I thinking of? When you have there you go. And then he's written love notes. We'll call them love notes to all these donors. Thank you for your support, so on and so forth. So I'm picking them up from him this afternoon. And then what I'll be doing over the next couple of weeks is delivering them. Not stopping to visit, not doing anything, but just letting them know they appreciate staying in touch. We work with an organization in Salt Lake that works with adults with disabilities. And one of their programs is these folks do art. They've got an art program, and every year they've had an art show. This year they down at the aviary, and this year they couldn't hold it in person because of the number of people. They actually did a drive-by art show, set up some of the art in the parking lot. They took 4 of the pieces of art and had them made into branded masks, because masks all of a sudden became a fashion statement. And so people were buying these masks as they could see the person there who had painted it. And then people would go online and they moved their art show to an online auction. And then I'm on the School of Music Advisory Board at the U, and they do an annual concert every year. It's called the Camerata Award. They recognize a significant supporter of the music school. And this year they couldn't do it in person. So it's actually going to be a virtual concert on December 11th. They would get sponsors in the past. There'd be a dinner, it'd be the traditional event. It would raise 50 or 60,000. Well, what the committee is doing is still going out to the people that sponsored it in the past. And the people are still giving the sponsorships, even though the concert's not happening. They're still giving their table sponsorship of $1,500, even though there is no dinner. They're actually going to end up netting more money because they won't have the expenses. And then they're doing this virtual awards presentation, and it'll be a concert that will be pre-recorded with students talking about it. And then through the fall, they've done small student performances shared on Instagram and Facebook, showing what their students are doing and how COVID is affecting them. So the issue isn't that they're doing it, that they're messaging differently. What they're doing is within their art form and within their community, they're finding ways to stay in touch with people and let them know what's happening. And what they're finding is people are still giving money. So it's not that they have a different message. They're being upfront about it. But what they are doing is they're showing people that they just didn't roll up and shrivel up in the corner, that they're still trying to do what they do, which is what artists have done for millennia, which is respond to the times they have.
I love that idea of responding to the times you have. I also will admit I have rolled up in a corner here and there throughout the pandemic. So I think we all have. I agree with everything Scott said, and a good stewardship program is a year-long program. And I always kind of take a deep breath at this time of year and think, the place I want to be and want our organization to be is that we have been in such constant communication and, listening all year long that now we can unabashedly ask for money with no regret or hesitation. And I do think December is a great time to just make it simple and make it about that gift, because it is the season of giving. So I'll maybe speak to like a little bit more of how we actually logistically get that done. Probably like us, you're sort of looking at your donor base and saying, okay, who usually gives, who hasn't given? Maybe they gave us $100 on the Give PC, but they usually give us $1,000. It is a spreadsheet and it is name by name, which sometimes feels a little brutal, but it is the time of year to be doing that. And it doesn't feel brutal if you've been in touch all year round. And we really think about, okay, who's out there that maybe is positioned to make a second gift, maybe is positioned to increase their gift, usually gives and has not, and how do we best reach out to them? So because we have to be practical and we have limited time, as much as we'd like to have the same communication for every donor, we do prioritize. by the impact they can have in this moment of time on the organization. And often what that looks like is, hey, I'm going to call them. I'm going to ask this board member to call them. We're going to do a handwritten note to an elderly person with a return envelope and a stamp on it. And we kind of work down in a very practical, feasible way our list and how we're going to make a very specific, individualized outreach and ask to that person. And the story at this time of year, I like to keep short and sweet and about that gap. So, here's everything we want to accomplish. That's great and lovely. Here's how far we've been able to get in part due to your past generosity. And here's that gap. Because that gap is a place where donors see themselves. And so you have your goal and you have your reality, and that space is in between is where they can make a difference. And so making clear that gap gives a place for someone to walk in and have a part in success in something that they love and care about. So I would keep messages at this point fairly succinct. I would give pep talks to the board members who are calling and say things like, giving is good nationwide. November, the stock market went gangbusters. Just remind them that people are in a position to continue giving and want to be a part of something generous. And what you offer them is what they are currently longing for. And I think it's either a phone call or a Zoom or an email or a little love note on a card, and you just kind of prioritize that list and you get done what you can get done. And it's never going to be the whole list, at least not for us. I mean, that's just the reality. But that's sort of what we end up doing this time of year from a very tactical approach to end of year giving and messaging.
Hey, Katie.
Yes.
With your funder hat on,
Sure.
And throughout this year during the pandemic, what has resonated with you specific to arts and culture? Because I know you've heard both from the Arts Council, many times you've heard individually from arts organizations, asking for support or advice. What's really hit you or been effective for you as a funder, and maybe also for your, board members and donors, because I know at times there's obviously, especially early on, the heartstrings were pulled towards critical needs in the community. But as we started thinking about overall health of organizations and arts and culture in particular, I mean, when did you see or hear effective messages there?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I think it's more of a timing thing than the message. I think at the beginning of a pandemic, you have so much uncertainty, so much that people want to be very strategic. And in March, April, May, the thinking is, okay, my gifts are going to be around urgent needs that keep people in their homes, food security. Not that things are currently certain, but we have an understanding of what it's going to take to get through, I think, the duration of this. And we know that help is there's a light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccine, right? And people are in a financially strong position. So I think it's more of a timing question that you are now poised to say, we're still here, we still matter, and thank you for your early generosity to our community. We too, love this place and want to keep people in their homes, and now it's our time. I think you have a timing ability here right now that's very well positioned for your supporters to realize, I'm still financially sound, I can give again. And I'm going to give to those things that I really care about, that I'm close to, that I have a relationship with. I also would say, and I think Scott put it really well, a clear, transparent plan. No one expects you to be doing it perfectly, because that's impossible. But a pretty matter of fact of, hey, we usually raise this much money. It's instead this. We usually spend this much money. It's instead this. Here's our plan, and come be a part of it with us. I think it's really good to have that transparency. I think that there's always the human inclination to show the best side of things. But if everything's peachy keen perfect, then what's the role of that donor? Like they don't have a role in helping. On the other hand, if things are dire and a sinking ship, people do have that good money after bad fear. That's no doubt. So a plan is a very reassuring, thing to put in front of donors. So I would say that's really important. And I guess I would just say, I heard this from funders, and certainly we are a funder in that situation where people did shift their gifts. I mean, absolutely. Like I sat and cringed on your behalf in those conversations where people said, I usually give to XYZ, but right now I'm going to give to this. I think those people are in a different place like we all are now. They've lived with 8 months under the pandemic under their belt. So you can go back to those people, I think, very bravely and without hesitation.
Well, and I think that's key, Katie. I mean, something that you said that resonated with me is first of all, timing, because I think we all, and I even heard it from a board member who was cultivating a donor relationship, and they literally said, you know what, I usually give to you guys, but I'm focusing all of my fundraising on health and human services this year. And she was really taken aback. And even though I gave her kind of this arsenal of talking points about why it's important to support arts and culture right now, she felt really taken aback and felt awkward, right? And was trying to figure out a way to talk and keep arts and culture relevant at that time. But I think now that we are in 8 months, and people are, especially people who are normally in a position to be philanthropists and to give at that level, are for the majority, we're finding financially sound. And so going back to those people and talking about something you said that also I think was really important from a messaging standpoint, because while I hear what you and Scott are saying, that messaging doesn't necessarily have to change, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that the story has changed. I mean, many of us haven't been able to execute our missions the last 8 months. We are in this sector where we aim to gather people for shared creative experiences, and we're not able to do that. There's a lot of really great examples that even Scott talked about where we can be inventive and have these innovative ideas where we can change our programming to fit where we are right now. But the story has changed because many of us, can't execute what we normally execute. We can't offer our normal membership packages that many of our arts and culture organizations rely on for earned revenue, because you can't give away a show. You can't give away the experiences that you're used to. But the longing and getting back to, having that hope for 2021 for a vaccine, providing that viewpoint of optimism that, we are going to be back. And I think the identity of our town, our arts and culture organizations are essential to contributing to that. And to as we exit this really difficult period, making sure that our arts and culture organizations are sound and still around is critical. And so I really appreciated what you said there, Katie, too. The longing factor, I think, is something that we all need to message, that we're all really longing for these experiences. We're longing together again, but we need to kind of fortify and buttress our budgets to make sure that we can be around for 2021 and 2022 and beyond. So
Jocelyn, to comment something you said, and one of the things that Katie mentioned is the transparency. Yeah, I do think you need to communicate transparent. Your message is, how has this affected us? And if you think about finding new ways or creative ways to demonstrate what you do, I'm struck by the Amazon commercial where the girl does the ballet performance in the middle of the street, and it's the young man purchases the spotlight and the sister advertises it. So there are ways to do what you do creatively. The other thing you touched on, though, is like memberships. And yeah, there will be some people that if you can't get the membership to the museum, the show, the tickets, they may respond to that. There may be people that if you ask them to make a gift in lieu of a membership, they still want you to be there. Whether it's $25 or $50 or $100, don't make up their mind just because you can't offer them the tickets, the coffee mug, the free entrance, that they may not consider a year-end gift just to support what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Scott. I think that's, I mean, I know that's super relevant to many of the organizations that are on the call today. So, and I think some of them are even, you guys are already in the process of maybe innovating or changing up your membership model. And so I'm curious to hear what is in the works there here locally. But just to be mindful of time, I did want to open it up to the floor. If anyone on the call had some specific questions about this topic, questions for Katie, questions for Scott, about, you know, fundraising, or, I mean, really it can be anything, I guess, COVID specific in that arena. But does anyone have anything that they wanted to talk about or take advantage of the fact that Kate and Scott are here with us? No questions?
I do want to make a comment.
Okay.
Katie, I've really enjoyed working with you. I'm going to miss the hell out of you next year.
Thanks, Ari. I'll miss all of
Done
you,
a
but I will be at all your events because I'll have more time potentially.
Yes, and I'm going to call you about a small donation.
No, thank you.
Any other questions? One thing that we didn't touch on, if there's no other questions from the group, and we were just touching on it, Scott, was this idea of earned revenue and how it has been a pain point, I think, for organizations, you know, not able to normally sell tickets, memberships, because many of them are benefit driven. And I'm curious, and I want to open this to the floor too, if any of you guys have seen some great models, but, you know, have you guys seen new ideas come forward in pre-sold packages or pre-tickets or new membership models that could be applicable to arts and culture organizations to help us kind of get us through these next 6, 8, 12 months? I'm just curious if you guys have seen anything really successful there as it relates to arts and culture.
I'm not seeing a whole lot in new earned revenue. I mean, I think until you know how your individual organization is going to come out of this, whether you're performance art, whether you're a museum, whatever it is you do, I mean, your costs are going to be lower because you're not going to be putting on the performance or opening or whatever that may be. The only thing I would suggest is I would not be shy about asking people who have had memberships in the past to just consider a gift. If you're not going to offend them, I always used to have these conversations with KUER and KUED when I worked at the U, that one of the things that public radio and public television have done is trained us to not give unless you get the coffee mug, the video, and they just couldn't get out of it. They couldn't wrap their head around just asking people for money. Just take your membership list and be honest about what it's done. You're not going to break their bank financially, and just ask them to consider a gift. And then when you're ready to roll out what membership may look like in 2021 or beyond, then you can do that. But you will have some of them, if not a good percentage of them, just make a gift because you asked. But don't get caught up on they're expecting something from us.
I'll just add to that, with more and more people giving from donor advised funds, and you're really not supposed to get benefits, even though we understand that that happens all the time. That might be something where people are getting more uncomfortable with the benefit that's received. You know, we have a community pass, so we have our own internal challenge with people trying to give to it from a donor advised fund, and we really can't take that. And it's just, I have found it's getting messier and messier to provide benefits because of the popularity of donor advised funds. And donor advised funds are only under fire for more regulation from the IRS. Like, it's not going to get better anytime soon. So as hurtful, as painful as it is, time like the present to like maybe break some of these habits if possible. I mean, easier said than done. I understand that fully. Or at least maybe shoot towards a more balanced revenue. Also maybe a great time to advocate for budgeting towards, when possible, development people whose job it is to build the relationships beyond the transaction. Again, easier said than done in this time. I fully recognize that that's not maybe feasible in the present moment, but maybe seed those for the future. But in terms of urban revenue, I'm sorry that I don't offer much more in terms of ideas.
Well, and I think Katie's right that benefits and membership programs such, donors didn't create that and the community didn't create that. We created that. And we created this transactional relationship rather than just asking for support. And the transactional relationship is they won't give us money unless we give them something of a certain value. And yeah, there's some people that will respond to that. But I think in this day and age, I mean, most memberships are not hundreds and hundreds and thousands of dollars. It's 25 or 50 or 100, whatever the amount may be. Just ask them for a gift. And because we're the ones who trained them to only give if we have something to give back.
Can I piggyback off that for a second? One of the big values that we have that most other organizations don't have is we have a huge list of patrons. And I know all of us have them. And, that 80-20 rules existed for most of us where we get donations from a very few number of those patrons. But what we found is that, exactly what Scott and Katie said, we spent a long time since March engaging everyone on that list, keeping communications open, telling them what we were doing and being very honest about the situation, creating programming anyway for free. And then we made a big ask. My board was very sensitive about making an ask for the arts organizations, but we did it anyway over this period of time. We got, I would say, a lot of money considering we've cut our expenses so much, in excess of $50,000 from $25, $50. And these were not donors who ever gave us any money. We were looking down the list going, who is this person? And there's people from Florida and a lot of second homeowners. And almost none of our transactional givers responded to that. So we all have a lot of people who are in our mailing list. I think opening it up and just being honest and asking for any amount of money, especially with as much as our costs have been reduced, it will really help help us survive. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to announce our season now for the summer. We're hoping the vaccine will help us do that. At the top of that list are going to be anybody who has supported us since March. Yes, we're going to include, all the other normal large donors, but those people who gave us anything since March, we're going to make sure they're thankful, they know they're important to us. We're going to continue to move them up that ladder of giving so that they get that experience. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to engage people we've never engaged before in a different way. And hopefully when we do our programming, come up with new programs and new ways that will take some of that transactional nature out of it. Because you're right, Scott, we did it. We created those transactional givers. And Katie, you made a really good point about donor advice funds, and I do a great deal of giving out of one. It always bothers me when I make a donation out of a donor advice fund and I get a thank you gift. It's just not right. We put an into it at the Institute. You give us a donation from a donor advice fund, you get a specific letter. It doesn't say it's tax deductible, and there's no gift of any value associated with it. We had a really hard time with that.
Well, thanks for that, Ari. I think that's awesome to hear, what you guys are doing and those experiences as we've kind of navigated through these last couple of months here. And so I'm just looking at the clock and acknowledging that we are almost at 2:00 here. So if there are any final questions, feel free to speak up. but I think we've I don't know, this has been really helpful for me, to just kind of all come together and talk specifically about this one topic. Acknowledge that we are in a really unique time within this weird pandemic that we've all been in. And so as an arts and culture sector, we may have a new opportunity with year end, and so focusing on timing and capitalizing on that, reminding that donors that we are still here, we're still relevant, and it's a great opportunity to just reconnect with donors, and who may have shifted earlier, as Katie may have mentioned, and as some of us did experience, which was really kind of painful and hard to swallow, but reconnecting with those donors and talking about how we are, we're super eager to continue what we're doing and contributing to our community. Being transparent, that's something that I took away from Scott, that it's everyone is very aware that arts and culture is struggling, that this is a really hard time for us to exist and to execute any programming, and transparency is key to make those asks. And then something that Katie said also is to just make sure we have a plan, and not be afraid to share that plan. I thought that was really helpful, Katie. And then making the effort to make those individual calls, taking advantage of this virtual space that we've been able to all be swiftly trained on and very proficient at now. It gives us an opportunity to maybe connect with people that we wouldn't normally be able to. And then, if you are going to do an end of year fundraising campaign, the letters are still relevant, and that messaging is still the same. Those tactics can be still the same, and just moving forward. So do you guys have Katie or Scott, any closing remarks before we hop off?
Can I make one closing remark? I want to thank all of you for what you do. And I'm a huge supporter and believer in the arts. If you look at the entire history of civilization, the only mark left that indicates that man existed was the art and the culture left behind. Whether it's music, what somebody drew on a rock 2,000 years ago, art, architecture, the written word, whatever it is, that is the only proof that man existed. And what you do is important. Yes, business plans and stock markets and all that are great, but without you, no one will know we were ever here. So my hat's off to all of you for what you do, because you give up a lot to work in the arts community, and you do it out of passion and love and devotion. And I just want to say thank you.
That was so beautiful. I'm not going to try and
Thank you. That's very kind.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well said, Scott.
Okay, well, we appreciate you all joining. Again, I did get a couple of regrets, just because I think we're, right after the holidays, some people still have turkey brain, so we're not able to join. So we'll be sending out this recording to the group, along with some resources. We'll share Scott's info and, of course, Katie's, even though many of you have it. So anyways, if you guys have any questions, feel free to email me. I can always forward to them as well. So thank you. I hope you guys all remain very resilient. Thanks for all you're doing, and we'll reconvene again soon. So thanks again.
Take care.
Thank you.